I was really fortunate in my training as an artist, and still to this day, to have very, very great teachers. And among those great teachers, the one that I want to talk about today is Paulding Hamilton. So when I met Paulding, we were both actually taking a workshop from another artist, I think by the name John Ebersberger. So we were taking a workshop, a color study workshop. But at the time, I was really interested in classical art, or classical realism, or the art of making something look like something. And color study, really, I wasn't ready for it. It wasn't something that I personally found that was going to take me to the levels that I wanted to achieve. And then Paulding, I remember in that color study class, we were told to have white canvases. And I remember this artist showing up with a tone on his board. And then the teacher was just like, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to tone it." And again, John Ebersberger is an amazing artist of his own right, but this is about Paulding Hamilton. So, yeah, that was the first time I ever saw someone tone a surface. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So what is he doing there? So he toned it so that, well, you know now, those of you that are watching my videos, you know why we tone our surfaces, so I'm not going to go into that. After that workshop, I really started to talk to Paulding, and Paulding was like, yeah, I'm teaching this portrait class and figure class here at this school named Zoll Studio in Timonium. So he invited me over, and I was taking classes with him, and that was when I really, really started to understand drawing. And in particular, since I'm going to be talking about my two major influences, today's video is going to be about Paulding Hamilton's influence on me, and then the next one is going to be about Studio Incaminati. So Paulding, I really learned a lot about measuring, in particular, since I just finished a painting there, in particular measuring how you can close one eye and kind of take measurements optically. I've shown it in some videos how to do that. And again, I've never even heard of such a thing until studying with Paulding. And the other thing that I really learned with Paulding is the umber sketch. The basically starting off a painting with a drawing brush and then developing it that way. Many of you have seen me start off with that umber sketch, with that burnt umber sketch. Yep, that came from Paulding. And another major thing that I learned from Paulding was that there really isn't one way to construct a painting. Here are some images of Paulding's artwork. So you'll see that Paulding's work varies from kind of a more impressionistic, more expressionistic, to a more classical, highly refined, very realistic kind of thing. And then he balances these things. So here is an image of how Paulding would probably start a painting. And then here is where the painting goes after the initial start. Now Paulding, he's a very perceptual painter. Another thing I learned from Paulding very early on was to work from life. Now you might be thinking, well, that was painted from a photo reference, or you've been painting from photo references a lot. But again, for me, it's kind of a necessary thing, because if I could afford to have a model here and work from life every single time, I certainly would. Now, Paulding works strictly from life. I'm not saying he's never worked from photo reference, because I know he has, but Paulding strictly works from life. Now, the only times I know that Paulding may have worked from photo references for portrait commissions and things like that, but he works mainly from life. And another thing I learned about when I was studying with him, and I'm still learning from him, is to not over color. Paulding is really he's really gifted not only at drawing but also in terms of color. So here are some samples of his landscape paintings.
Now, if you look at the warm yet cool contrast in the sky, you really get a sense of Paulding's observation, his ability to observe subtle color shifts. Now look, as we kind of walk around the edge of the top of the little building that Paulding depicted there, and look at the specificity to the edges. So the edge quality in this landscape is also a tremendous factor to the success of this painting, as well as the edge quality and the textures in the rocks. So now if we look at the rocks, look at how the kind of the coldness of the shadow, the daylight shadow contrasts with the warm kind of gray. So the grayed warm areas of the rocks, we really get a sense of texture without that much detail. Really, this is a masterpiece in terms of the economy of brushstrokes. And that is carried through all the way across the entire painting, and even the composition itself. Take a note where that window is placed very strategically to give this painting an overall sense of unity. Now moving on to another landscape. So remember, Paulding works strictly from life. So we really get the sense of light, and we almost know exactly what time of day it is that we're observing here. My guess is that it's probably the afternoon, maybe 12 o'clock p.m. to 1 o'clock p.m., depending on where you are in the world. But another thing that I really like about this painting is the sky, and the way that he chose to record the instance where there was just a little streak of light in the clouds, and how that compositionally adds another focal point, whereas the rest of the sky is kind of more quiet, and then all of a sudden we have all these brush strokes in the trees that gathers your attention, and then it's a little bit more quiet again in the foreground with the kind of suggestion of the grasslands. Now this is a painting that I truly enjoy to look at. It has an almost kind of fatal, ominous quality to it. The fact that he chose to center the perspective of the building that he's painting, almost as if it is not just a landscape anymore, but rather it is a portrait of that house that he is depicting. Now, what really strikes me about it is the kind of quietness about this entire picture, and then the quietness of the house contrasted with those really sharp shadow shapes, the cast shadow shapes, which are very well studied in terms of their colors. Look at the warm contrast on the building, contrasting with the kind of neutral lavender bluish tones in those cast shadows. And then when you look around the picture, look at the brushstrokes in the sky. This is something I've never actually seen in one of Paulding's landscape paintings or anyone's landscape paintings. It's almost as if the sky is falling down. Look at the brushstrokes kind of going in a kind of vertical direction, and then you contrast that with the craziness of the brushstrokes that are going on in the foreground. Now look at the pathway that's being paved with the foreground being contrasted with those kind of sharp, prickly green shapes. Now, I'm not an expert in terms of agriculture. I can only describe things in terms of their relative shapes to you. But now another area that is very interesting in this composition, if we look to the left of the building, look at how that little corner itself, that can almost be another landscape on its own. So that's why I think that this is more of a portrait of this landscape, because there are really multiple elements framing the one central figure. And again, the choice of the perspective of locking in the central focal point very close to the center, it's very much something that most of us painters don't do. We usually don't place our focal points in the center, but with this composition in general, the overall mood of the picture seems to work with the placement of that central building. And now for the next part of this video, we're going to take a little road trip to Zoll Studio in Timonium, Maryland, where Paulding teaches his portrait class. It's also the same school where I was taught, where Paulding taught me when I was learning, and still is teaching me to this day, because we do still paint together at this school once in a while. So let's go.
Let's take a look at the landscapes. Now, if you take a look at the quality of the light of this painting. Now, let's get really, really close. See how it all kind of disappears? Now, let's get really, really far back to about here. So right about, I'd say, I don't know, 8 feet away. Now, look at the light that is emitted from that painting, from all of these paintings, but in particular, this one right here, look at the fact that he's got a warm contrasting a cool in the sky. Now, how on earth does he do that? Now, Paulding is a master in both drawing and color, but in particular, he is extremely, extremely good at layering his colors. If you see, there's a little bit of spots of warm juxtaposed with the cool. In particular, there are some pinks in the sky, a little bit of orange, but you get the sense of, now, I might get this wrong, but I think that this is morning light. So maybe around, I don't know, 6 a.m. or something like that. Sun has risen for maybe 30 minutes or so. Moving on down here, this looks like it's evening light. I'm trying to move the camera just so you don't get too much of a glare, but it seems to be glaring a lot. But now, just the same thing, so you look really, really close. See how really, really close everything just starts to disappear. Now you stand back, till about this distance. So you stand about 5 feet, 6 feet away, and check that out. It all just merges together. And then look at the light. Let's see if I can lower the light sensitivity on my camera. There you go. Now look at the light just shimmering on the corner of the snow. So I'm going to raise the light sensitivity a little bit. Now let's move on to this little corner here, and we can see some of Paulding's figurative work. This one has so much power in the way that it it guides and it moves your eye. Your eye goes right towards the focal point. Then it moves right towards basically the second focal point. And then it just travels down towards the still life, the landscape, the tree, and then ultimately the stuff in the background. And you really get this sense of depth in this painting. This is a classical, basically a classical masterpiece executed in modern times. Now, if I can get a better image of this painting, I will insert it. If I can't get a better image of the painting, shoot, this is still a pretty good shot of this painting. Now let's get even further back. Let's take a look at this little bird. See all the reds, the illusion of all the detail. Now, Paulding is a wizard when it comes to texture. Now, if you look at the texture on the bird, get really close. Let's get really close. Nothing. Just nothing. It's all gone. Far back, the thing looks like it's emerging from the shot. Like it's emerging right from the frame. And then again, let's revisit the texture in this painting. Look at the texture of the leaves in contrast with the texture of the dish. I may have to change the light sensitivity. There you go. Now you can really see the texture between the leaves contrasting the smoothness of the plate. All right, now let's take a look at one of Paulding's portraits. Now this is one painted of, I think, Dacia. I remember this model. I was actually there when Paulding was painting this. Now if you take a look at all of the textures, again, Paulding really is a master in texture, as well as drawing and color, of course, but texture. Now look at the impasto on the forehead. See the frontal ridge of the skull, right around there. Right over here we have the frontal region of the skull, the superciliary. Look at that, a single brush stroke for the superciliary. I'm trying to hold the camera still. I need to get one of those traveling tripods. But anyway, just amazing, the texture.
And again, I think it's really important to honor those that have taught us. And I'm going to be forever thankful for all of the knowledge that Paulding Hamilton has bestowed on me. So that being said, if you really want to see more of Paulding's artwork, I'm going to leave a link in the description box down below to his Instagram page and to his website. That being said, I really hope that today's video helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork. And as always, I'll be back again very soon.